Dear friend, now in the dusty, clockless hours of the town, when the streets lie black and steaming in the wake of the water trucks, and now when the drunk and the homeless have washed up in the lee of walls and alleys or abandoned lots, and cats go forth, high-shouldered and lean in the grim perimeters about, now in these soot-blacked brick or cobbled corridors where light wire shadows make a gothic harp of cellar doors, no soul shall walk save you. Friends, Cormac McCarthy fans, fellow booktubers, Dude Bro Lit here, back with another book review. This time we are going to be talking about Cormac McCarthy's 1979 masterpiece, epic hangout novel, SUTTREE. Where to even begin with this book? The excerpt that I just read was the opening of Cormac McCarthy's SUTTREE, and it is an italicized opening that takes a couple pages of setting you up for this atmosphere, this world that you're going to be thrown into. You're literally thrown into the depths of this underworld, this underbelly, which is Knoxville, but really it is just some sort of a purgatory where you live throughout the novel until arguably the end, where SUTTREE pulls you out and thrusts you into some sort of freedom from this purgatory, or at least that's how I read it. But anyway, where to begin with this novel? I'll be honest, when I first read it, well, a little bit of story time, I saved SUTTREE for the end. I read through all of Cormac McCarthy's books, starting with Blood Meridian, and then I sort of went back to The Orchard Keeper, and then I went all the way through chronologically, but I skipped SUTTREE because I knew that a lot of people consider it to be his other masterpiece, and so I thought, you know what, I'll save it till the end before I get to The Passenger and Stella Maris. And so I finished The Road and loved it, and then I thought, okay, here we go, SUTTREE. I'm ready to be blown away. I'm ready to, just fall in love with the language and the story, and I'm ready to have my mind blown like Cormac does. And my first read-through, I did not know exactly how to feel about SUTTREE. And I've noticed that a lot of people feel the same way about it. There's another Cormac McCarthy YouTuber who I love and respect, who actually put SUTTREE as his least favorite of his novels. And if you know who you are, I'm a big fan. But I will have to say, I see where you're coming from, but I wholeheartedly disagree after a second reading of SUTTREE. My first reading, I knew as soon as I finished it that I didn't know how to feel about it, that it would need another reread or maybe even a couple rereads. It's one of those books that feels more like a Faulkner book where you cannot have an appropriate thought or opinion about the book on a first reread. If you do, if you fully absorb the book on a first reading, I applaud you. But I did not. It's a very difficult book to describe the feeling that it gives you. But the first time I read it, I finished it, and I was like, wow, that felt really powerful. There's a lot of memorable things, but I can't really put a finger on it. It feels like it's slipping out of my hands. It feels like it's slipping from my mind. It feels like one of the fever dreams that SUTTREE has in the novel. It feels like the whole book is just this collection of dreams and scenarios that sort of, flutter away as soon as you end it, and you're sort of left with this empty feeling, and you're sort of left with like, what was all that? What was it for? Like, okay, this guy just kind of roaming around Knoxville, and then at the end he just up and leaves. Is that it? A couple funny things happen here and there. A couple tragic things happen here and there. There's a whole lot of selling a catfish and using the money to go get a chocolate milk and a burger, and that's over and over again. Is that it? Like, why is this considered his masterpiece? Well, let's talk about it. So Cormac, as you guys know, passed away, I guess at this point about a little over a month ago. And as soon as he passed away, well, I'd been reading a lot of Faulkner. I know I had just finished reading The Unvanquished, which, if you haven't read The Unvanquished, it's sort of it's a novel, but it's sort of divided into like 6 or 7 short stories that are, connected. And I thought in my head, I was like, this sort of reminds me of the way that I felt like Suttree was structured. And so once Cormac died, I looked at my bookshelf of my Cormac books, and my hand went straight to Suttree as far as what I wanted to reread as soon as he died. I was like, I don't know why, I want to reread Suttree. I feel like this is what I want to read right now. And now that McCarthy's gone, I want to read Suttree again. And I picked it up out of my bookshelf, and I started with the italicized beginning, and I went from there. And I can tell you, it was 100% different experience than I had the first go around. Now that I knew how it ended, I sort of could expect what was coming. It sort of allowed me to sort of sit and relax in the book a little bit more, if that makes sense. The first time reading it, I felt a little bit on guard. I felt a little bit on edge. I felt a little expecting something big to happen, expecting like, okay, now this is where it's going to get crazy, or this is where Suttree's going to, do something unexpected, or okay, this is where some sort of like villain's going to get introduced. So the whole first reading, I was sort of on guard, and I couldn't really sit in the book. The second time around, I just decided, you know what? I'm just going to sit here in the shanty boat with Cornelius. I'm going to drink some beer with him. I'm going to go up to the hill with him and have some turtle soup with Michael. I'm going to go hang out with J-Bone and the boys. I'm going to, go look for Harrogate in his little viaduct, and I'm going to really just live in the novel. And it's a completely different experience when you do that. And it also really, what I noticed about the book is that, and McCarthy does this in his other novels, but in this one it's especially apparent, his choice of not doing a lot of internalizing of Suttree's thoughts, and giving a lot of that responsibility to you, the reader. And so it sort of causes you as a reader, it caused me as a reader to be Suttree in the book. To understand the book, you have to be Suttree. You have to realize, oh shoot, my son died. I had to bury him with my own 2 hands, and now I'm all alone on a street, and I'm crying in a churchyard, and I'm crying with a bottle of whiskey in my hand. So when you turn the page after that, and Suttree's back to his old shenanigans, it may seem like that, but he's not. You have to realize that somewhere in the back of his mind is that traumatic experience of burying his son, and you have to realize that everything after that, you have to remember that in context, and you have to remember what that sort of thing, how it affects him going forward. And that's sort of how the book is structured. You have to remember what happens and put that on Suttree. You have to, at the end of the book, you have to like, when he's hanging out with Joyce, and spoilers by the way, but I expect if you come to this review, if you haven't read the book, I would say my one piece of advice for you, if you haven't read it, don't expect it to be Blood Meridian. Don't expect it to be The Road. Don't expect it to be All the Pretty Horses. It's none of those things. It's its own thing. It's a very unique McCarthy book. And the best advice I can give is read it twice. That's the only piece of advice I can give for Suttree. Read it carefully, read it twice, and click off this video and go read the book. Okay, so for those of you that have read the book, back to what I was saying, when he's hanging out with Joyce, you have to remember he's not just this guy hanging out with Joyce just for the heck of it. You have to remember that just recently he lost Wanda to this tragic accident. You know, a year or two before that, he lost his son. Um, he's starting to lose all of his friends. Like, all of these things are always in the back of his mind, and you have to realize that, because it really colors a lot of the things that happen. And it makes you realize that him having a chocolate milk and a burger, hanging out at Comer's, you know, shooting pool, feels like there's just a tint of sadness even in those moments of respite. And it makes you realize, like, of course he wants to go drink with J-Bone. Of course he wants to get his mind off of all this crap. Of course he wants to go see Ab Jones or Daddy Watson. He wants an escape from his mind. And that's what he's trying to do the whole book. It seems like he is trying to get out of his head. And he's a very stubborn person, and realizing that, and taking a deep breath and relaxing and living in the book and living with SUTTREE reaps all sorts of benefits. And anyway, all that to say, that's just sort of the base template, I would say, of how to really enjoy the novel and really see it for what it is. And I realized that in the second reading, as soon as I started reading it again, I was like, okay, it's like, I remember this character, you know. Okay, that's why SUTTREE's hanging out with these guys. Oh, that's why SUTTREE's crying, you know. When he starts, every once in a while in the book, he starts randomly crying. You're like, well, of course he's randomly crying. He's depressed. He is such a depressed character. And, you know, so keeping all that in mind, what is SUTTREE about? What's the plot? There's no plot of SUTTREE. If anything, SUTTREE reminds me a lot of some sort of a Faulkner novel. It reminds me of, like I said earlier, I finished reading William Faulkner's The Unvanquished, and then I went straight to SUTTREE. And I try to approach SUTTREE as I read The Unvanquished. The Unvanquished is 7 short stories that are, you know, loosely threaded together that create this overall novel story. So what I decided to do with SUTTREE, and I don't know if anyone else has done this, probably so, but SUTTREE is divided into chapters, but it doesn't say that they're chapters. It's just the way that you know if a chapter is starting is, you know, it has a huge letter there. So as you can see, I decided to name these little chapters or short stories. Like this one here, this is the Moonlight Melon Mounter. So this is the short story of Gene Harrogate when he decides to violate the watermelons. And I decided to approach it like that. Like, what if each little chapter, I pretend like it's a short story, you know, and I don't try not to expect the whole novel to have a cohesive plot or a cohesive structure. Approach every little chapter as a short story and see what happens. And that was really helpful, because you realize that it actually does have a structure once you sort of look into it. Like, for example, there's a chapter that I titled Overboard Welfare, where Weird Leonard comes to SUTTREE and approaches him and asks if he can help him throw his dead dad's body into the Tennessee River, because his mom has been trying to get welfare on him for 6 months or something, and he's dead and he's stinking and rotting. He gets SUTTREE's help to throw him in the river. So while he's throwing him in the river, SUTTREE has such weird feelings about it, and he's asking, you know, let me see if I can find it here. Let's see here. Okay, so I found it. So this is in the short story with Leonard, and so SUTTREE is about to, you know, they're about to kick Leonard's dad's body off into the river, and SUTTREE says, "Are you going to say a few words?" "Do what?" "Say a few words." Leonard gave a sort of a nervous little grin. "Say a few words? Aren't you? I mean, you're not going to bury your father without anything at all." "I ain't burying him." "The hell you're not." "I'm just putting him in the river." It's the same thing. It's the same as burial at sea. Well, goddamn, SUTTREE. Well, this old son of a bitch never went to church in his life. All the more reason. Well, I don't know no goddamn service or nothing. Shit, you say it. The only words I know are the Catholic ones. Catholic. Catholic. And then Leonard goes on and says, like, he sure was no Catholic, you know. So, you know, Catholicism gets brought up, prayers get brought up, a little bit of the religion, and then you'll notice that as soon as that chapter ends, the very next page is when SUTTREE's at the steps of the church, and he's sort of drunk in the church. And you realize, like, that can't be a coincidence, you know, that one page SUTTREE is saying, like, well, aren't you going to say a few words, you know, like, and then the very next page SUTTREE's at a church. Stuff like that. It's subtle. It's not, you know, it's not explicit, but you realize that there's a little bit of structure. Later on in the novel, you know, Mother She, who's this witch in Knoxville, sort of gives SUTTREE this weird prophecy. She lays out all these bones and things on the table, and she says it's some sort of a doomed prophecy, and she looks at SUTTREE and she says, you should have come alone. And then right after that, that's when SUTTREE goes up into the mountains. And so you realize, you know, SUTTREE feels that doom, you know, invading him, and he decides to go up to the mountains right after that. And so sort of approaching each little story each little chapter as a short story helps out a lot. It allows you to be a little more patient with the book and to appreciate each little story, because there's tragedies in here, there's comedies in here, there's a prison story in here, you know, there's a weird fever dream psychedelic story in here, there's all sorts of things going on, there's romance in here, well, heartbreak, but so yeah, you're basically living with SUTTREE. You're living in Knoxville in this time, and you're brought into the mind of a deep thinker, which is SUTTREE, a poet, a man who is haunted by death. Obviously, everyone who knows this book knows that he's haunted by death, but it's true. And he, for some reason, is drawn to death, but he's also trying to pull away from it at the same time. The novel begins with a dead body being fetched from the river, and then it ends with a dead body in SUTTREE's shanty boat. And you might think, at least my thought was, is it the same body from the beginning? In a weird way. A lot of people suggest it's SUTTREE's body, and it could be. There's a strange thought in my head that thought, you know, seeing as how the novel is structured, what if it is truly a whirlwind structure, and SUTTREE himself committed suicide the same way that the guy at the beginning did? What if SUTTREE jumped off the river and someone pulled him out and put him back in his houseboat? I really don't know. It also could just be a random guy, but there is a lot of weird mystical elements, especially towards the end, that sort of leave the ending feeling uncanny, or sort of, you're not sure if it's real, or if it's a dream, or if he's in heaven, or if he's dead, or if he's in hell. But anyway, okay, as you can tell, this review discussion is all over the place. It's sort of, you know, that's how the book is, and it's hard to talk about the book in any sort of structured way. So let's talk about the comedy of the book. The book it's easily Cormac's funniest book. Everyone says that, but it's true. There's parts of this book where it almost feels like Superbad or something. It feels like the humor is so witty and creative, and it's weird little situations, and the dialogue is so like SUTTREE can be really funny. Obviously, Harriet is really funny. I don't know if Harriet is the funniest character. That might be a little bit controversial. It's like the things that he does are funny, but I think some of the little quips of some of the random little side characters made me laugh more. Like the part where SUTTREE is with Reese, I gotta find this, dang it. Okay, so the part where it's a little bit later in the novel. It's actually one of the It's probably my favorite short story of the novel. I called it "The Tragedy on the French Broad." It's the part where Suttree runs into meets his family of family of five. Reese, his wife, Willard, the girl. Oh, it's family of six, I think. Family of six, and they go muscling. Like, it's a little side adventure where they go muscling, and Suttree falls in love with the girl. And spoiler alert, it all comes crashing down, literally, and the girl dies, and Suttree rows away, and it's another tragedy in Suttree's life. But there's also some of the funniest parts in the middle of it, which is pretty much, a little microcosm of how the book feels. A lot of sadness, but there's some funny parts too. So Suttree and Reese got some pearls from the river, and they're going into town to sell them. And Suttree's expecting some sort of a big payout, and Reese is too, but he's sort of keeping something from Suttree, and it's pretty obvious. But anyway, this funny, hilarious section is so funny. So they're showing the pearls to this jeweler, and so the jeweler had taken off his spectacles and was preparing to look through his glass again. "We may look country, but we ain't ignorant," Reese told him. "Let's go, Reese. You ain't never seen no nicer a one than that there." The jeweler bent with his monocle to his work again. Suttree took the old man's arm and steered him out the door. Reese was looking over the prized pearl for some undetected flaw. In the street, Suttree turned him around and got him by the shoulder. "What the hell is going on? I thought you said that big pearl was worth $10. "Shit, Sut, don't pay no attention to him. He don't know the first thing about it." Suttree pointed toward the window glass. "He's a goddamn jeweler. Can't you see the sign? What the hell do you mean he doesn't know?" It's just hilarious. I find that stuff, especially the delivery in my head. You sort of see it as a movie, as a comedy movie at that moment, and I see it's just hilarious and things like that. There's little short stories where Harrogate's doing these schemes where, obviously the Moonlight Melon Mounter episode is pretty funny, and the little dialogue between the farmer and the guy is really funny. But there's this whole section right after that where it's the prison story, and Suttree and Harrogate meet in prison, and Harrogate's making this little prison ring in prison, and he's doing this little clanking sound, and someone gets super mad at him and says shut up that clicking, and it starts this whole brawl in the prison, and Red Callahan's involved, and people get seriously hurt, and all the while Harrogate's just sitting in his bed, just kind of holding his spoon and his ring, that he's just kind of sitting there watching it all. Everyone's getting this huge brawl. It lasts a while. People get thrown in solitary. People who weren't even involved get injured, and so all this happens, and then it all ends, and then the lights go out, and then Harrogate's just sitting there, and he just starts clicking again, and then Suttree's like, "Harrogate, will you knock off that damn clicking," or something like that, and that whole part's hilarious. Harrogate comes up with these little schemes. He zaps pigeons out of the air to eat them or try to sell them to the black people because he thinks black people will buy pigeon, or he says black people will buy anything or something. And he gets two old Ford car hoods and glues them together and uses that as a boat. And then there's this part of the novel where there's this city ordinance where if you bring in bats with rabies, you get paid $2 or something. And Oh my goodness, it's just so funny. Harriet finds his poison and basically like poisons like hundreds and hundreds of bats and gets them in these sacks, brings them to the town, and he basically only gets $2 because the doctor just wants to know how he did it. And it's funny because Harriet owed Suttree $2 for something in the beginning, and so Harriet, got the $2 back that he could pay Suttree with. And man, there's just so many little things like that. It's hard to, I could sit here for hours and probably go through each little short story, but man, what does the book mean? This might sound cliche, but the book really is truly at a microscopic level, at a deeply, deeply personal level. It's just a slice of life. And asking how this book feels, what does it mean? What's the structure? What's the meaning of it all? It's like asking someone, what was the structure? What was the meaning? How did you feel about like the last 4 years of your life? It's like asking someone that. It's like, well, I mean, there's been a lot of good stuff happen. There's been some bad things. I feel like I'm sort of making progress. I keep kind of falling back into the same hole again. I met a new friend. I haven't talked to some old friends in a while. I'm a little tight on finances right now. That's pretty much how Suttree feels. It truly feels so true to life. And so if you don't like life, if you don't like how life feels, you probably won't like Suttree. It's not an escapism book. It's the opposite. It's diving super deep into the real, like deeper than most people are comfortable going. And then if you can look past that, it even goes even deeper, and then it gets sort of spiritual in a sense, because it sort of gets even underneath the real. And from the beginning, it's described, we are come to a world within worlds. And truly the world in Suttree feels like some sort of a limbo. It feels like purgatory. And it feels like you are descending further and further and further down. And a lot of the language in the book, it's beautiful language, by the way, but a lot of the language is describing like claws and creatures and witches and trolls and demons and monsters and ghosts, and all that imagery is there. There's parts of the book where you feel like you're in some sort of a medieval fantasy, but it's Knoxville, it's this little Tennessee town, but it's described with such clarity and such spiritual oomph and poignancy. And man, you have to read it for yourself to figure it out. But gosh, so all that to say, I do believe that every single person will experience something a little different from the book. I think it's hard to say something objective about the book besides it's obviously beautifully written. It is Cormac's most sophisticated book as far as the language goes. There's a lot of difficult language in here. I found it his most difficult novel, and that's probably why I didn't know how to feel about it the first time, because it's very hard to penetrate. He creates a very thick wall, and you sort of have to slowly claw your way through that wall. And even when you do that, there's a whole other wall behind that. So anyway, I've been singing the book's praises. What do I feel like is still lacking? What are some negatives I feel? To be 100% honest, it's super strange because I felt this way the first time I read it too, but the first time I read it, when I got to the end with the typhoid fever dream, well, not even that. I would say even the Mother She psychedelic drug experience, that and the fever dream, I was sort of left weirdly underwhelmed with it the first time I read it. And so this time around, I was like, oh, I'm gonna get this part this time. This part's gonna hit home. And it still was a bit weird to me how hard it was to understand that part, and that might be the point of it. And there's little parts of it that I do like. I like the part of the psychedelic experience where Suttree is a little boy again, and his little sister is carrying this doll, which I believe is his dead brother. It's this weird dreamlike thing where, you know, she drops it and the baby falls on the floor, and he says the boy was very much afraid, and parts like that are affecting. But there's other parts where he's sort of describing various little images from his childhood, and it's very scattered, like a bottle, like a jar full of mice, or like a dead cow on the road, a dead poodle, and all these sort of scattered things that it's like the imagery is really strong, but I'm not sure how it all ties together. And that's one part where it's like, I like the language, I like how it's really psychedelic and strange, and it makes you work really hard to kind of get your footing. But it's hard to piece it all together, and that might be something that maybe in a third or fourth or fifth reading I might put together a little better. I do like the section of the fever dream where he is standing in front of a judge in a courtroom, and there's some weird thing about a Tweety bird and like a clock store, which I got that the clock store was some sort of a callback to the watch in the beginning of the book, where Suttree said, with the feeling he could not name, the dead man's watch was still ticking, or something like that. And that does echo, or that does foreshadow what the clock room scene in the fever dream. But it's hard to put it together. I guess the best way to put it is time is infinite, and time, no matter what, whether you're alive or not, time goes on. Time does not stop for anyone. It's for anyone's death. And that's interesting, because that's sort of a opposite approach to how Alice Western feels and how she experiences the world. She's the main character in the atomic duology, Passenger and Stella Maris. And Alicia, if she could talk with Suttree, Alicia would probably say no. It is not. She's a solipsist, so she would say, no. Once I'm gone, as far as I'm concerned, time does stop, or something like that. The universe does not exist if I cannot perceive it. And Suttree comes to the conclusion at the end that nothing stops moving. Everything is always in motion, regardless of your life or not. And again, it's this weird, strange idea that Cormac poses and over and over again in his books, and this unpenetrable wall of God, this constant mystery, this ever-flowingness of life, and how the universe doesn't care about you, doesn't care that you're here or not. And that's something that Suttree battles with in his head. And I think a huge thing that he learns is throughout the book, he describes this other Suttree, this anti-Suttree, sort of like he knows from the beginning, he knows that he is stuck or trapped or sort of walking in the footsteps of the future him and leaving the tracks of the past him. This recycling life, and he is constantly aware of that, and I think by the end he accepts it, and he sort of pulls it all together. He pulls the future him and he pulls the past him, and he says, you know what, I'm not going to think about that anymore. I'm just going to go on my path. And he sort of spiritually, symbolically breaks off from his fate, it might be simply put, but starts, to carve his own way, even though he realizes that death awaits him down the line. He sort of lets that thought go and goes his own way. so by the end, does Suttree is Suttree dead? Is he alive? Obviously, Cormac, you know, made it hard to fully say, but I like to go with what one of the little black boys said at the end when he said, "Ah, old Suttree dead." I don't believe Suttree's dead. I think he's fully alive. I think that the body at the end is sort of some sort of a scapegoat. Honestly, I think Suttree saw that body as an opportunity, almost as a fake your own death situation. I sort of got that the second reading, especially with the way that it describes, people going, the ambulance going to his shanty and people watching sadly from the storefronts. As far as, I realized like, oh, the people that are watching this from the storefronts, like Howard Clevenger, Tripping Through the Dew probably, and Ocean Frog, are probably thinking like, oh no, Suttree's dead, There's an ambulance at his riverboat pulling a dead body. Suttree's dead, as far as they know. And Suttree very purposefully doesn't really say goodbye to anyone except Tripping Through the Dew. But I think Suttree would like to think that they think he's dead. I think he saw the dead body in his shanty boat and he thought, you know what? People can think this is me. I don't care. I'm disappearing from this life. I'm leaving Knoxville. And he thought he saw the body as sort of an opportunity. Like, you know what? That body might as well be me. And people might as well think that it's me. They might as well think I'm dead. I'm off. And he buries all of his talismans. He basically fakes his own death at the end. And I'm just realizing that now, but it's sort of a weird quasi fake your own death situation where he sort of disappears without a trace. And do the people in Knoxville think he's dead? Possibly. I could see Howard Clevenger or Ocean Frog watching that body being brought out of the shanty boat, and the whispers and the rumors going about that Suttree died in his boat, and it moves on. And I think Suttree would like to have it that way. He doesn't like the idea of having his memory. I don't think he likes the idea of having any sort of memory left in Knoxville. I think he likes the idea of burying himself in Knoxville, spiritually speaking, and moving on and going to something else. And so obviously the ending section of, there's a huntsman in the woods and his hounds tie or not. There's a ravening of souls and fly them. The last sentence of the book is fly them. There's a lot of discussion about what that means. Some people think it means like fly the dogs, release the dogs, or what I think it means, fly them, is flee, escape, run away from them, avoid. I believe that's what it means. I think Suttree at the end is leaving death in a way. He is pursuing life and all of its mess and all of its grossness, and he is flying it. He's escaping the hounds who are tiring not for the souls. And he has seen that. He saw that in the dream. He saw that in his life, that death awaits all of us. It's coming for all of us. But it's like you have to either live drenched in that thought, or you have to live sort of with your head above water of that thought. And I had a thought while I was reading it subconsciously of how the whole book, Suttree, seemed to be like underneath water, the water of death, metaphorically speaking. And then by the end, he just pokes his head up above it, and he wants to live his life sort of like with his head above the water of death or whatever. I thought that was maybe right. Maybe it sort of subconsciously stuck out. Anyway, so yeah, y'all, it's fantastic. A lot of people find it to be sort of autobiographical. It's hard not to think that. I mean, there are parts of it where I sort of imagined, McCarthy as Suttree. There's parts where I imagined myself as Suttree, and then there's parts where Suttree was his own man. But as Cormac put it himself, I think Suttree, one soul is all souls, one man is all men. Suttree is all the characters. Michael, Ab Jones, Harrogate, these characters, all of them, share a piece of Suttree. Suttree shares a piece of them. And you realize that there's a little bit of these characters in all of us. I know that's a little cliche, but it's true. And there's a lot of echoes and foreshadowings and repeating phrases and repeating imagery that comes up in the book. And again, it leaves you with this strange feeling of a little bit of optimism, a little bit of sadness. It's a gut. There's a lot of gut punches in the book. There's a lot of humor in the book. If you're looking for his funniest book, this is it. But you have to be careful. It's not all funny at all. There's also parts that are his most devastating as well. It's his most funny book, and it's also his saddest book. All at once in a lot of ways. So all that being said, where does it stand in his career? It feels like its own thing. It feels like it's on its own, stands on its own two legs, a lot like Blood Meridian does. It's so unique. I would originally put it maybe below The Crossing and even maybe below The Passenger and Stella Maris for me. But after second reading, and I know that I'll probably read it again 1 or 2 times even after this, I'll have to reread Blood Meridian again, but I'll have to read The Crossing again. I really loved The Crossing the first time around so much, and The Crossing left me with a lot of similar feelings, but The Crossing is not nearly as funny at all. The Crossing is basically all sadness. But there's something about Suttree that I feel like it could easily be my second favorite behind Blood Meridian, or even maybe my favorite. I'll have to read Blood Meridian again, and The Crossing again, and The Passenger again. I really loved The Passenger the first time around. I loved The Passenger more than, All the Pretty Horses, more than The Road, more than No Country, Outer Dark. The Passenger was extremely good, I thought. I thought it was his best book as far as his new style goes, his new kind of spare style. But yeah, Suttree is amazing. I would highly recommend it. If you are a Cormac McCarthy fan, if you are a deep literature fan, if you're a fan of James Joyce, if you're a fan of Faulkner, this is probably something you would deeply enjoy because it feels infinite in depth. It feels like something you could infinitely return to and find new meaning, new things, new callbacks, new foreshadowings, new symbols that you didn't see before. There's a lot of religious imagery in here. There's a lot of little life advice you could find in here. There's a lot of story. There's a lot of story here, and it's amazing. It's beautiful. The language is amazing. The language is soaked, it's sweating, it is caked in mud, the language is, there's condoms hanging off of the branches, but there's also, flowers and vines growing up, the sides of the cliff sides, and there's water seeping down, and there's pools, and the best way I can describe the language is that if Blood Meridian's language is crackling like a fire and it's sort of like dusty and it's sort of, Blood Meridian's language feels like you're sort of like having your hands in sort of dry earth, Suttree's language feels like it's sweating and it's dripping, and it tastes like sewage or something, but that's maybe not the best way to put it. But if you read it, you'll know what I mean. You feel like you are sort of wading through a river reading Suttree, and you're finding all sorts of little things coming your way. So yeah, that's Suttree, y'all. It's a masterpiece. It is beautiful. It requires several readings, I believe. And that's why I put this review off, because after the first time I read it, I knew I couldn't have any sort of substantial thoughts on the book. Even now, I think there's still things that I'm missing. Like sort of maybe some of the subconscious elements of the fever dream and the psychedelic experience. I did like the psychedelic excursion in the mountains. I thought that was a little bit easier to grasp the second time around, but maybe my third or fourth reading, I'll sort of get even more. And I do believe that that will happen. You know, you'll get more and more, especially if you jot down notes and sort of highlight things and look certain words up. There's like a lot of like little Latin phrasings in here you'll have to look up. It's beautiful. I would highly recommend it. It's hard not to give this a 10 out of 10. My first time reading it, I probably was closer to like a 7 or an 8, just because I felt like there was a lot of room for growth with it in my head. But it's a 10 out of 10. It's arguably his best novel. Will it stand the test of time like Blood Meridian? Probably not. I mean, Blood Meridian is a Western. You know, it's in the Western canon. It's an epic. It's up there with like, you know, Moby Dick and Shakespeare, and that is a beautiful, haunting book as well, obviously. And you know, the plot, it's a lot tighter. Blood Meridian is a lot tighter than SUTTREE. SUTTREE feels way more scattered and way more loose, but it's hard not to feel like Cormac put 100% of his soul into this book, maybe more than any of his other ones. So yeah, highly recommend SUTTREE. Pick it up, read it if you haven't already. It's a 10 out of 10 masterpiece from Cormac McCarthy. Rest in peace. You know, he was a beautiful, beautiful writer, and man, what a loss that was for American letters. What a loss that was for literature, for world literature in general. I hope that someone will take the mantle. Someone will write novels that will make you think deeply about life and death and what it means, and God and love and joy and suffering and all of those things, that truth and beauty and goodness. Someone who writes about all of that, and because that's what matters at the end of the day, right? So yeah, y'all go pick up SUTTREE, read it, take your time, read it twice, read it 3 times, read it 4 times, take notes, savor it, taste it, live with it, be SUTTREE for a little bit, go drink a beer with J-Bone, get yourself a chocolate milk, go hang out with Harrogate, go get you a Thanksgiving turkey from Walgreens, and I'll see you guys in the next review. If I continue with this trend, my next one should be Blood Meridian, so we'll see how that goes. I'll have to really prepare something for that one. But yeah, y'all, I'm gonna sort of not edit this. If there's sections where I'm like looking for stories, I'm sorry about that, but I wanted this to be totally free flowing, like the book itself and like the Tennessee River itself. And hopefully I'm sure there's things that I missed, but anyway, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will catch you guys in the next book discussion, and see y'all later. Bye.